this is about self-care, tender self-care, and that's the theme that we want to really reinforce again and again today. So, I'll just briefly introduce myself. My name is Debb Kerr. I'm one of the core teachers here at EBMC. I've been involved with EBMC since the very beginning, which was in the year 2000 when a few people got together to start envisioning a center, an urban center in the East Bay. And I am incredibly grateful for this center, for the way it has grown and developed and manifested over the years. And I'm really happy to be part of it. I'm retired, for some meaning of that word, but I do a lot of dharma teaching, so there's that. But in my official work life, I was a speech pathologist, and I worked in hospitals and skilled nursing facilities for 35 years. So had a lot of experience with the medical world and with illness and old age and death in that way as well. I've been studying the Dharma since 1991 and was fortunate enough to be able to be trained in the Community Dharma Leader Training Program through Spirit Rock from 2002 to 2005 to 2008. I deal with a neurological disease, which is both a challenge and a teacher in my life. And so, yeah, I think that's probably enough. I'm really interested in how the teachings of the Buddha can liberate us and can bring ease in the midst of our suffering when the suffering can't be relieved. And so, on that note, we're going to start today with a piece on compassion. I'm going to talk a little bit about compassion, and then we'll do a guided meditation on compassion, primarily aimed at ourselves, which is often one of the hardest places to be compassionate, to bring compassion, but it's also one of the keys to developing a compassionate heart. And of course, it's essential for the theme for today, this tender self-care that we're talking about. I've been reflecting on today a lot in the last few days, and a couple things that have come up for me, specifically regarding compassion for myself, is one is a phrase that I use actually in my LovingKindness practice, and the phrase is, "May I take care of myself joyfully." So this idea, it's like, I don't know about you, but having a chronic disease really wears me down in terms of, it's like the tediousness of having to take care of myself over and over again. And so this phrase, "May I take care of myself joyfully," can be a seed that's planted that allows a shift in attitude as we learn what's needed to take care of ourselves the best that we can within the circumstances that we have. And the second thing that I've been reflecting on is, as I'm caring for myself, like particularly I have to do a lot of exercising, stretching and strengthening and whatnot, I frequently see my attitude when I'm doing that go to a place of, if I just stretch this a little bit more, I'll fix it forever. Okay. So that I can somehow fix the problem and be done with it, which really isn't probably possible. And so that's a way that I create a little bit of extra suffering a lot. And so seeing that and going, no, let me just stretch enough for now, has been something that I have to work with a lot, because I get in there and I get into the stretching, which is good, that's fine, but I get into it with this subtle attitude of, I'm going to fix this once and for all. And then, of course, I'm setting myself up for more difficulties. So there's going to be three really 4 components to this day. The first one is compassion. The second one that we're going to do is working with pleasure. So some skillful ways to bring in pleasure into our lives, which can be a real refuge in the body when we're in the midst of difficulty, or the mind. The third one is going to be given to us by a guest teacher this afternoon. Jim Willems will be with us, and he'll be talking about separating pain from suffering. So the difference and how to separate the two, which can be super useful. And then the fourth one will be a little bit on joy, bringing in joy with some laughter yoga toward the end of the day. So I just want to set the kind of overall path we're going to be doing today. I really invite you to view this day as a gift that you are giving to yourself. So, as much as possible, make it filled with ease, make it relaxed, have that attitude of compassion for yourself and the possibility of pleasure and joy. And with this attitude of the day being a gift comes the need to also open to the possibility of receiving this gift. So let yourself receive. I've done a lot of practice with nurturing, just absorbing the energy of nature, the natural world, the energy of loving-kindness practice, and that's been hugely beneficial. And I invite you as much as possible to have that attitude today, to just soak in whatever nurturance can come, Needless to say, this day is not about striving and efforting. It's about being present as much as possible with ease and tenderness and sympathetic joy as we see a toddler going by. A teacher I know named Bonnie Duran says, each of our bodies can be viewed as a sacred site. Often when we're in pain or distress, we really come to be sort of at war with our bodies. There's this struggle that's going on with our bodies or with our minds. Or we have aversion in some way, either consciously or unconsciously. Perhaps we can shift our view to seeing the body just as it is, as a sacred place, with its difficulties, with its pain. It's still this sacred vehicle that we have for being in this life. So some phrases that I've used that may be helpful. Along with, may I take care of myself joyfully. Another one is, may I lovingly inhabit this body. Is it possible to lovingly inhabit this body? And at one point I was looking at my body in the mirror a couple years ago and going, I don't like the flab, and I don't like the wrinkles, and I don't like the way, and then suddenly something shifted and it was like, wait a minute. Can I love this body just like it is? And that was a shift that had been a long time coming. This aging body, this imperfect and somewhat disabled body, can I love it the way it is? And that possibility was there for me. So, may I lovingly inhabit this body. And then the one that really taps into the quality of compassion is the phrase, may I care for this suffering tenderly. May I care for this suffering tenderly. Being in physical pain and or mental distress is exhausting. it just wears you down. We tend to close our hearts to that suffering in a way, in an effort to defend ourselves against that exhaustion, against that, constant distress. And that struggle often causes more distress. So we need to be able to access deep places of rest and renewal and of healing in whatever form that can take. So we may not be able to heal our bodies. We may not be able to completely heal our minds. But perhaps there is some healing that takes place as we are present for our suffering and learn how to hold it and bring some ease and comfort around it. At least open to healing in whatever form that takes. Now I know healing that word to heal or to be whole can be a loaded term for people with disabilities and chronic illness. It's like, wait a minute, what are you asking me to do here? I can't do that. You're putting this burden on me of fixing myself. That's not what it's about. It's about opening to whatever healing is possible. So I may not be able to hike long distances anymore, but I can still get out in nature and really enjoy it. And so that's possible for me. We may not be able to be the bodhisattva we would aspire to, but we may be able to open to a little more loving kindness and compassion, especially for ourselves. And then eventually that can blossom out toward others. And just a sidebar there, sometimes it's easier first to feel loving kindness or compassion for others, and then it can slowly reflect back on ourselves as we understand that the person that we may be feeling intense love and care for, which is usually someone that we know loves us too, they would really want us to be feeling the same sort of compassion and ease that we are wishing for them. So I just want to say briefly what the two are and how they differ, because they're just slightly different. They're both flavors of love, as we know. Loving kindness practice is the basic wish for others to be happy. May you be happy. And that includes all forms of happiness. So it's may you be safe, may you feel protected, may you be as healthy and strong as possible, may you be at ease physically, may you be at ease mentally, may you live with deep peace, may you love yourself completely just as you are. There's so many phrases that all encompass this wish for others and oneself to be happy. So that's loving kindness practice. Compassion is a slightly different flavor of love, in that it is the wish for others and oneself to not suffer. So it's the wish, may you be free of suffering. May you be free from pain. May you care for yourself tenderly. The issue with compassion is that in order to feel compassion, we need to let in the suffering. So it's a little bit harder than loving kindness. It really is only a little bit harder. But it does require us to allow our hearts to be touched by the suffering of others. And obviously we usually defend against feeling suffering, either ourselves or often we block out the suffering of others in the world, because there is this pain when we feel it. But the nice thing is that as soon as we open to allow ourselves, our hearts, to be touched by the suffering of others, the heart responds. There's this natural response that's right there of care and compassion. And there's a movement then from feeling the suffering of ourselves or others to imagining or wishing ourselves or others are in a state that's free from suffering. So I want you to do just a little reflection right now for a moment. If it's comfortable for you, close your eyes or just maintain a downward gaze if you want to keep your eyes open. Just allow yourself to notice that actually, I just want you to bring to mind now a friend or loved one who you know is having some suffering in their life. And pick someone who has not the most suffering, but some suffering in their lives. And just for a moment, allow yourself to feel the reverberation of that suffering in your own heart. And the immediate wish for that suffering to be alleviated. And now imagine that person in a circumstance where that suffering is no longer present for them. The situation has resolved. They've gotten over the illness, or they've got more financial security, or a job that they love, or whatever it is. Imagine the circumstance where that suffering has been alleviated. And feel the ease that comes around that. Just the difference there between noticing the suffering and the heart's response to imagine them in a place of not suffering. Now just come back to present moment, open your eyes. So I just want to offer a caveat there. Obviously, we're not fixing the person's suffering by imagining them to be free from suffering. If we were, if we were able to just wish compassion and then have the suffering of the other person go away, that would be nice. But this does not mean that we won't act in some way to help them, or that we won't act in some way to change the world when we encounter the kinds of systemic suffering that are in the world. But this is the starting point of the mechanism of how compassion works, where we allow ourselves to be touched by the suffering, and then there's this movement of heart. And when this movement of heart takes place, the key here is we're no longer in a state of suffering. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So we feel the suffering, there's this response of heart. Once that has happened, we're no longer in the state of suffering anymore. It's very interesting. And it's that capacity that allows us to do amazing things in the world with ease. It's that capacity that allows us to not burn out when dealing with the larger sufferings around us. But for now, we're going to stay focused on ourselves and our own self-care. So once again, just to paraphrase, the act of letting in the suffering of ourselves or others does hurt in the moment. But in that moment of touching the hurt, our heart's natural capacity for love and compassion comes out, and we move into a state of caring for the suffering rather than being caught in it. That's the basic movement. We've moved into the attitude of caring for the suffering rather than being caught in it. So the suffering that we're dealing with today is called dukkha dukkha, dukkha squared. And it's, the Buddha talked about this form of suffering as the suffering that comes with having a human body, a human mind, a human heart. That comes with being born, with aging, with illness, with death. So we can't control the circumstances that bring us pain, but we can control what the Buddha called the second arrow. Has anybody heard of the second arrow? I myself have a whole quiver of arrows that I tend to shoot off when I'm caught in pain. But the second arrow is this idea that our usual response to pain is to struggle with it even more. And so we blame ourselves for it, or we rail against it with anger. There's some way that we're locked in battle with the suffering that we're experiencing. And that is the second arrow that the Buddha talked about. So we can't control the first one, circumstance of whatever it is that's our illness or our pain or our difficulty of body or mind. We can't control those circumstances. Although sometimes we can work to change them, but we can control our response to the pain. We usually want to push it away or make it go away in some way. We struggle with it. And what we're going to do today a little bit is invite ourselves to not struggle quite so much. So meditation, one of the things that meditation does is teach us to be with things how they are. And that is the first step in stepping back from the struggle, right? Usually we want to make things different than how they are, at least subtly, it's like when we're sitting, even meditating. Oh, I'm a little uncomfortable, I want to be a little more comfortable. Oh, my breath feels a little bit too this way or too that way, I want to adjust it. Oh, my mind is a little bit agitated or too sleepy and I want to mess with it. We're usually always either subtly or very overtly reaching for something different, wanting something to be different. And that's a huge source of our suffering. It's a huge source of struggle. So meditation is a training in being with things how they are. And for me, there's this balance point, which I think is the hinge point of both working with my body and my disease, as well as working with the central question of meditative practice, which is, when am I being called to accept what's going on, and when am I being called to change it? So like in my own body, it's like, okay, I may be really stiff in a given moment when I stand up and try to move. It's like, oh, okay, well, do I just need to accept that right then and walk however best I can, or is it time to really go do some stretching? That's a very concrete example. In meditation, I may be suffering with a very difficult mind state. Is it time right now to just accept, oh, I'm really angry, or I'm really depressed, or really sad? Or is it time to somehow try to shift the mind toward a more positive mind state? And that's the art, right? That's what we have to figure out. The very same situation may need a different response depending on the circumstances. So, when are we being called to accept something, and when are we being called to change it? There's also this sense of vulnerability that frequently comes up when we're dealing with our own difficulties of body and mind. For me, I encountered some of my own delusions. The first delusion was, I'm not someone who suffers. It's like, what? But there it was, it's like, oh, I have to accept that I am actually someone who can be touched by suffering. It's like, whoa, there's a humbling thought. And then I encountered delusion number 2, which is that I've done enough loving kindness practice for myself. And so somehow that job is done. There again, there's that impulse to want to fix things once and for all. It's like, no, these are ongoing practices that we need to apply again and again and again. Okay. So I'm just going to say one more thing, and then we're going to do a guided meditation. And this one more thing is a little shortcut that may be useful for how to bring mindful self-compassion in any moment. So there are 4 steps to this. When you notice that you're suffering in some way, the first step is to actually or in your mind, put your hand on your own heart, or in some way come in contact with your own body. You may lay a hand on your cheek, for example, or heart, whatever it is. If you're in a public place where putting your hand on your heart would feel too weird, you can just rest a hand on your leg and feel the contact with the body. Second step is you acknowledge this is a moment of suffering. Here we are. This is a moment of suffering. The third step is to reflect that suffering is part of being alive. So this acknowledges that it's not a mistake that they're suffering. It's not an aberration. It's part of having this human life. And then the fourth step is to say the phrase, may I hold this suffering with kindness. May I find a way to treat myself kindly in the middle of this suffering. May I hold this suffering with kindness. One component of being in pain is that it frequently isolates us. We feel like we're the only person having this experience. I mean, we are. We're the only person having this very unique experience of this pain. But we let that isolate us and cut us off from everybody else. So in some ways, we allow ourselves to be isolated in our experience, cut off from the greater fabric of humanity, which can help us hold this. So it's vitally important to notice the feelings of isolation that come with whatever difficulty we're experiencing. And to allow ourselves to reconnect with others, to reach out, to do things like this daylong, to find someone who can support us, who can listen without needing to fix us, because that can be an additional burden, right? You talk to a friend about what you're experiencing and they immediately move to solutions, and I don't know if you're like me, but I've explored most of the solutions already. So that's not so helpful as just being a kind witness to what I'm going through right now. So anyway, just to find ways to reconnect. And we're going to do a little bit of that in a while here as well. So I invite you to sit or lie comfortably to find a really easeful position for yourself. So even as you're shifting position or settling into stillness in whatever way you can, to keep having that attitude of taking care of yourself kindly. So just noticing sounds and the silence underneath them. And if you can, coming into the body and allowing it to feel supported and still. And if the body is too difficult to be with now, staying with sounds, noticing thoughts arising, or noticing the breath if that's possible, and if that can be a place of refuge. And back to silence. So as much as you can, allowing yourself to relax. And remembering why you came here today. The wish to be free from pain, free from suffering. The desire to take care of yourself. Honoring that. Honoring that deep capacity for care and tenderness that's always there. No matter how difficult it may be to find sometimes. So if what I say is helping you, follow my words, and if what I say is not helpful, just find a way to let them wash on by, let the words wash on by, and be as restful as you can in this moment. Imagine for a moment what it would be like to be free from pain. And picture in a light and easy way, ease in the body, peace in the mind and heart. Remembering that you care about yourself, feeling that desire to care for yourself. And now bring to mind someone who's been a real benefactor in your life. Someone who has maybe taught you something really important or loved you at a time when it was crucial in your life. Or just some benevolent figure from any spiritual tradition. It could be a loved one, a friend, a pet, someone very personal to us, or it could be a spiritual figure Kuan Yin, the Buddha, Mother Mary, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Dalai Lama, or some other spiritual teacher who's really helped you. Picture that person in front of you, gazing at you, sending you wishes of love. Really feel how much that person wants you to be happy and at ease. This benefactor is seeing all of us, every inch of us, wanting our whole being to thrive, to be without pain. This benefactor is communing with us in the goodness of our deepest being, beyond all limits we might put on ourselves, sending us wishes of complete well-being and freedom from suffering. This being sees all of us, all of our beautiful qualities, as well as the parts we don't like so much about ourselves. This being loves us completely, accepts who we are without anything left out. All of us, our whole being is accepted and held in love. The benefactor is sending us these messages. I love every inch of you. You deserve deep well-being and love. You deserve to be happy. May you be healed and healthy to the greatest extent possible. May you hold your suffering with kindness and gentleness. As much as you can, receive the compassionate energy of these wishes throughout your whole being, in your body, in your heart, in your mind. Completely immerse yourself in the loving energy coming from this benefactor. To feel the care for the suffering that's there. To allow that in. This is a moment of suffering. May I hold this suffering in a field of infinite love and care. May I care for this suffering. This is what it's like to be alive in this moment with this body. The possibility of compassion. The heart's ability to receive care for oneself. Now opening a bit to be aware of the others around you in this room. Knowing there may be others who have similar pain or mental distress. Imagining what that might be like for them. Connecting again with the benefactor, the possibility of love coming in. Feeling immersed in that care. Sending some of that out around you, to those next to you, to those around this circle. Knowing there's always enough love coming from the benefactors. There's no end to it. Soaking it in. Feeling every inch of us held in compassion and love. And passing that on to others nearby. May you be filled with well-being. May you hold your suffering with kindness and gentleness. May you be free from pain and suffering. Again, feeling our benefactors' love and acceptance. Receiving it in every cell, down to your bones. Especially letting it pour into parts that are hurting. Feeling the love of the benefactor completely. Letting yourself become the benefactor. Become innate love and wisdom. Become compassion, radiating in all directions. Now resting in the radiant, loving energy that is both completely personal and absolutely infinite. Resting in compassion and peace. So we get to practice compassion with the real life.